Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe Yanez and I, we are joined by Sam Miller, the founder of Metabolism School. And we were just like riffing on metabolism and just a bunch of stuff. And I just started recording. So Sam, welcome to the show. Let's dive in, man. There's a lot to unpack here, but you were talking, I cut you off. So let's continue on what we were talking about.
Yeah, of course. So at any time I'm on a podcast like this, it's kind of natural. People talk about the word metabolism, and for even the athlete or health enthusiast, it's a word that's kind of getting thrown around a little bit more in our industry, I would say, as things like hormones and longevity, gut health, all of these topics have become much more mainstream, I guess you could say. You know, these used to be topics that you kind of had to be very, very much within a niche to kind of understand these things. But now, you know, even the average gym goer is starting to care about their hormones, their gut health, their performance, their longevity. And so metabolism is really kind of the intersection point of those things. It's just a way to describe the processes that go on in our body every single day. So when I think of someone's metabolic health, we're really talking about quality of life, performance, longevity, you know, so many things that impact not only our present health, but our long-term risk factors. And so a lot of my work is really focused on the conversation around metabolic health and how nutrition, training, lifestyle, and even some of the stuff that comes in like, telemedicine and biohacking, those things also play a role in our metabolic health. And that's one of the reasons we've seen kind of the popularization of the term metabolism and things like hormones as well. So something I've been focused on for a long time. I've been in the industry for close to 18 years now, and definitely became a topic of interest for me, not only in terms of my own health, but my family, and just honestly, I had a lot of clients, you know, who were struggling with their health as well. And it was something that allowed me to provide more value when I was working with them in that setting.
And so just kind of backing up a little bit, talk to me about your background. So, you know, you've been in this space 18 years. What got you into this particularly? And then, what's your background before that? Were you active in sports? Give us a little bit of framework on that.
For sure. So my interest in metabolism really started with hormonal health and nutrition. I was always active growing up. I wasn't necessarily, you know, the leanest or most jacked kid, but I played sports growing up. I actually had a pretty significant concussion snowboarding when I was a teenager. And anytime you have a head injury, this was a little less well studied at this time. Now we have a lot more research on NFL players and athletes who have sustained concussions or TBIs. And that can have a significant impact not only on your gut-brain axis, but also your endocrine system, which is basically your body's kind of governor for your hormones, if you will. So I started to have an interest there, as well as the fact that I was just, you know, like most teenage guys, I wanted to perform better, lift more weights, look a little bit better in the mirror, and be lean and jacked. So as I was setting out to do that, I also had an interest in personal training and fitness. So after just kind of playing sports in high school, I had started personal training folks between high school and college. That was my side hustle throughout university years, and a great way to pay the bills when you're a college kid and just trying to make ends meet. So I was always kind of had that training and nutrition background, also competed in physique and bodybuilding, in addition to sports. But a lot of my interest in the more nuanced kind of metabolic health concepts, longevity, and how these tie together, aside from just the bro science that a lot of us kind of get acquainted with when we first start training and trying to lift more weights or perform better in the gym, was actually my parents' health as well. So when I was a teenager, my dad had a 98% blockage of one of his main arteries, so significantly impact his cardiovascular risk factors, kind of a near-death experience there. And then also now, even in recent years, my mom has been a cancer survivor and fighting that for actually kind of multiple stages of chemo treatments. And so it's kind of interesting, as my work evolved over the years, I kind of had a different purpose each chapter in terms of continuing to invest and explore this work. So what started out as just me trying to figure out my own health later turned into having a much greater purpose for my clients and even my family as well.
Man, I love that. You know, Sam, I'm super curious about your take on this. I'm a big nutrition geek myself. I've kind of like written the nutrition protocol that we put out through our training platforms. And in many ways, kind of like you, started as like a very much like, I wanted to improve how I looked and how I performed. In many ways, like you, my parents' health and my family, and kind of like helping them improve their health kind of shifted me in one direction. And now I feel like I'm kind of in the middle. But what I would love your take on is I do feel like there are these, maybe not as much now, but I feel like even 2 years ago, there was these very, very like distinct schools of thought. There was the bro science that I think you mentioned, like calorie in, calorie out, count your macros, it's all about body composition. And then there's the like, I don't know if I would call this the metabolic health side, but just it's much more about quality of food, like, gut health, all of that. And I feel like at times they were like, it's one or the other. And I personally, in kind of my journey, went from very, very bro science to like super into the metabolic health people. And then like now I find myself more finding the nuance as a lot of people do. And like, both are kind of valid. I'm curious, like what your take is on both of those. And do you feel like they're still very distinct and very like it's one or the other? Or have you kind of like come to a little bit of a middle ground as well?
I think it's about the integration. It's not calories versus hormones or calories or hormones. It's really, even to say calories in, calories out, we have to understand that we're talking about is energy, right? So calorie consumption is the intake of energy, and calories out means energy expenditure, or what a lot of people in the bro science world refer to as, well, and also in exercise physiology and nutrition textbooks, TDEE, or total daily energy expenditure. Now, energy in is impacted by a number of things. One of the main things that people struggle with when they have poor metabolic health is hunger regulation and blood sugar regulation. And so hormones like leptin and ghrelin and GLP-1 help to regulate that appetite signaling. And we have these mechanisms known as the hedonic and homeostatic eating systems, just a big fancy way of saying our body's natural mechanisms for regulating hunger and cravings. And so to say that hormones don't impact energy intake is kind of a stretch. And then also to say hormones don't impact energy output. Well, if you feel like garbage, you got low testosterone, low thyroid, like tell me you're going to go have your best training session of your life when you feel like trash. It's not going to happen. And then also when it comes to energy expenditure, things like non-exercise activity from steps, walking, being active with your kids, if you don't have optimal health and you're not supporting that through the nourishment aspect of nutrition, very, very hard to perform your best and feel your best. So I fall in the camp of, yes, energy matters and we need to account for energy intake and energy expenditure, but the food quality conversation, the micronutrient conversation, the lifestyle optimization conversation, that plays a role in our hormonal health and our gut health, which impacts how we feel, and how we feel may impact our daily decision-making in terms of our diet and our exercise and our performance. So I view them as inseparable entities. I do think some people overvalue the thermodynamic side a little bit, the macros and calories. I think those are a tool and unit of measurement to help people achieve portion control and not overeat. I think if you've never tracked your food before, keeping a food log or a dietary journal can be super helpful, mainly for awareness purposes, right? We have to start somewhere. So I'm not against those things. I just think they're tools for a season. And like for many competitors or athletes, a lot of them actually undereat. So creating that food log or journal may actually encourage them to support adequate nutrition. For the chronic dieter, maybe it's realizing like, hey, we haven't been eating enough for many, many seasons now as you've tried to lose body fat. And maybe we need a different season of nutrition, something like a reverse diet or maintenance phase of some kind, or maybe we need to scale down the training a little bit. So I think there's certain aspects where education around hormones, gut health, physiology, biochemistry can support our understanding of some of these kind of mainstream concepts. But a lot of the internet arguments, I think it just strikes me as people doing it for attention and to have polarity, on the concept. So what's more engaging, like the middle stance or taking the extreme of like, hey, it's all about hormones or, and I do think some people take that too far. So for example, like the like carbohydrate insulin model of fat loss, right? Or people who think you have to be keto, to have healthy hormones. I don't agree with that stance, right? So I'm not someone who falls in that camp either, but I think macros and calories are a tool, but to neglect hormonal health, to neglect gut health, things like insulin sensitivity, we know that's important not only for long-term risk, but even, and not just your lifespan either. It's also your health span, your quality of life, your cognitive function. All of those things are impacted by the more holistic side that you mentioned. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to all of a sudden, burn incense while you prep your meals and completely like abandon, maybe more of like, what feels more like the grit and work hard kind of grind mentality that a lot of people have, on more of like, hey, just track your food and train hard and, you're going to be good. I think there's lessons from that as well. And so I think the best thing we can do is sort of take the best science from each of those camps and also see what works in practice. And I know I've seen enough athletes and enough clients who try to play macro Tetris and just hit calories and they still feel like trash. And I also know people who quote unquote eat healthy or do the Whole30 and shop at Whole Foods, but they don't have the body that they want. So we really need to take those factors into account and have a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. And that's a lot of what my work has been in the industry, is combining those conversations in a way that people can actually understand, and rather than fear mongering or overwhelming people, really trying to break that down in a digestible way.
But man, dude, I love it. And just to hammer home your point, just like nuance isn't sexy, and that's the problem. Like on the extremes of both sides, right? Like the thing that makes, a sensational Instagram post is either, on this side, the if it fits your macro guy that is super jacked, that can eat donuts and all that because it fits his numbers. And on this side is the guy who's like, shirtless in the supermarket telling you about how, all these foods are just going to like, kill you
Yeah,
for lack of a better term. And there's a middle ground there. But again, both of those sides are the ones that like get all the shares and get all of that good stuff.
For sure. And I'm in between, right? Like learn how to read a food label. Because it is in between.
Well, yeah.
The ingredients matter. Like I would never, I'm typically not the guy who's creating those grocery store videos, at least not in that context. And let's say there's two sides of this, right? So the influencer you mentioned eating the donuts, he's focused only on the macros portion of the food label. The other person who's maybe a little more on the holistic side of things or very ingredient centric is only focused on the ingredients and maybe less to do with the calories, but they both matter and impact each other, right? So energy consumption in and of itself, caloric excess, right, can drive things like insulin resistance. If you have, on the other side though, if we're eating single ingredient, minimally processed foods and eating whole foods, lean proteins, high quality carbohydrates and dietary fats, good omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, we see in practice, and anyone who's coached a real human being knows that impacts your hunger and satiety, that impacts your decision-making and your cravings, how you feel after each meal. And if you do it long enough and you stick with it, we see health improvements. And now what really helps drive this home is when you're also using tools like lab work, blood testing, because you can see it, but not just on the outside in the progress photos, but you see the inside transformation as well. And that's why I really try to use both, not only for clients, but even in terms of the health professionals that we work with and teach, is because that gives you a full kind of 360-degree view of what a person's experiencing. So I agree with your stance there. And I think just a lot of times it becomes like a popularity contest in the nutrition industry at times.
Yeah, I just want to ask though, so just to summarize what we're talking about, because for people who are listening to this and it's like, okay, what we're discussing is quality of food versus like macros and not really worried about quality of food. I'm wondering, after the people you're working with, because we work with people all the time. I mean, I just came back from one of our gyms right now, actually. We work with people all the time in the fitness space. And I know that you work with people all the time in this particular space. What have you found across the board as like themes that people can work on to improve their overall gut health and like high level themes? And then what have you seen from improving the gut health? So let's just say someone's on the train, like Gabe was talking about the macros, and they're just like, dude, they're eating their macros right. They're looking at their calorie intake, but they're not really worried about the types of food they're eating. They're just looking at purely how many calories in, how many calories out. What impact does that have on gut health? What have you seen? And then with that gut health, what have you seen turn around for people cognitively? Because that's the part that I'm most intrigued on, is how people can eat different, not only to look better, but also just to think more clearly and not have that fog. So what have you seen in that realm?
Yeah, so brain fog can be attributed to a couple different things, and I'll go down the gut health rabbit hole as well. Brain fog in general can be certainly driven by gut health issues, also adrenal and thyroid considerations. And for men, if you have low testosterone, that can be a big driver as well. So on the gut health side, if someone's following a more traditional if it fits your macros approach, a lot of what I see is trying to fit in these snacks as meals and foods that may be lower calorie in a sense, but maybe they've got added sugar alcohols and different things to make the food taste good, or it's like a packaged food, or think about things that you might be able to get at a supplement store that's basically just a lower calorie snack of some kind. A lot of times eating those in excess can really upset individual stomachs and things along those lines. I would say on the other side of the spectrum, I see a lot of women, not only in CrossFit, but people also doing like group fitness classes and resistance training, where in an attempt to eat very low calorie and hit their macros, they kind of volume hack their meals in terms of their food. So they're including a lot of cruciferous vegetables, a lot of salads, they almost overdo certain food groups to the point of a little bit of gastric distress. So not that by any means am I saying that you should never eat a vegetable, but some people, in an attempt to always feel full, they're like afraid to eat white rice or something, or they're afraid to eat a sweet potato, but they'll eat broccoli and cauliflower rice and spinach and things all day long. So there's different sides of this. Some people have gut issues, even though they are technically eating quote unquote healthy. Other people are resorting to kind of meals out, not cooked at home. A lot of the grab and go snack foods that are marketed as lower calorie, right? I'd say on one side, it's a convenience issue. On the other side, it's people who have been dieting and in a high stress environment for a long period of time. And aside from food, some of the biggest drivers of gut health are going to be related to sleep and stress in your lifestyle, excess caffeine consumption, because let's say you're following like a if it fits your macros style diet that's not the most micronutrient dense, which when we say micronutrients, I'm talking about vitamins and minerals. If you're following more of an if it fits your macros approach and you are a little bit more high stress, maybe you're training, consuming a little bit of excess caffeine, all of those things can impact your stomach acid levels, your motility, just overall gastric function. And that's what begins to, in an optimal state, your gut has protective mechanisms to prevent overgrowths, and what's known as gut dysbiosis is commonly talked about in the industry. When you have lower stomach acid, when motility slows down, when we don't have that optimal kind of micronutrient or microbiome status overall, it can lead to some of that dysfunction. And that's when people start to get the symptoms like bloating or early fullness at meals, or changes in their bowel movement patterns, or gas or discomfort, when eating proteins and things. So I'd say there's a number of factors. If I had to have two camps, like just to simplify this, because I realize it can be a very nuanced conversation. Two most popular things I've seen over the years is the highly trained individual who eats almost in such a militant regimen, highly regimented way, where they're eating a lot of the same food choices all the time, and in an attempt to reach satiety or manage their hunger, they're doing a lot of things that are contributing to digestive distress. And also the training caffeine contribute to that as well. On the other side, if it's the macrotecturist side of things, it could be related to not necessarily getting their fiber from the best choices. They are frequently consuming those grab and go options, not preparing meals at home. And then in terms of a lot of kind of like Frankenfoods, if I had to describe it that way, those are the two biggest themes I've seen over the years. And you can tell distinctly the patterns when you see a food log, right? Like I can open it up and it's the difference between someone who's having egg whites for breakfast versus someone who's, dropping their kids off at school and they had, popular brand of protein bar with 13 grams of sugar alcohol in it. They do that over and over again. Eventually, that can bother their gut. So there's not really a one size fits all, but if I had to have some common themes, there's a few nutritional patterns that drive it. And then anytime you have excess stress, training on an unintelligent program and lack of sleep, those are big ones. And then for our first responders out there, night shift workers, that definitely can contribute to some digestive distress as well.
Sam, I'm super curious if you can maybe confirm something that I've seen and I've suggested to people. Because another thing that I've seen when it comes to, and this is more on the hormonal health side of things, but when people go down the macro Tetris route, obviously one thing, and you alluded to this when you were talking about gut health, is trying to find not calorically dense foods. And so fat becomes this thing that people start avoiding. It's fat-free this, fat-free that, skim this, skim that. And I found that specifically when, some guys that we work with, and we actually had someone in our app post their macros for, the end of a 12-week cut, it's a red flag to me to see a fat number below 50 grams for a guy. And I know that fat specifically is something that is important for hormonal health specifically. Like there is an amount of fat that you want to have, even though, yes, fat is always going to be a little bit more calorically dense. Based on your experience, how much truth is there to that? Like there being a prerequisite amount of dietary fat that you want, not even to speak to like where you're getting that fat from. Obviously, there's healthier sources than not, and the impact that has on hormonal health. And does it have any impact on gut health as well?
Yeah, let's start with the gut health side just to tie it to Jason's question on gut health, and then I'll wrap back around to the hormonal health side. So when someone's going with a lot of low fat options, and you'll even see this with people who have a lot of protein shakes and egg whites, there's actually most animal products or protein based foods in nature contain a little bit of dietary fat, some more than others, right? But usually there's at least a little bit kind of coming in with that protein naturally. It's only through industrialized agriculture and the way that we produce whey protein and egg white protein, or you can buy egg whites without whole eggs and people separating those. So fat slows gastric emptying, which can actually be a good thing if you're consuming proteins. Another issue that we see with people who are consuming just a lot of chicken, a lot of egg whites and stuff kind of comes back to that low stomach acid issue again. But low fat can be a red flag for a number of reasons. Fat on the gut health side, again, is more related to kind of slows digestion, helps with that regulation of blood sugar. Similar, having fat and protein at a meal versus just straight carbs is going to have a little bit of a different effect in that postprandial setting, which is your post-meal response. On the hormonal health side, where I think people make the connection between fat and hormones is so fat or dietary cholesterol is a precursor to reproductive hormones. But the first thing we have to look at is total energy availability. So calories as a whole. And anytime I diet and I drop calories, I am going to see metabolic adaptation, which is what you've noticed. So metabolic adaptation is when we see lowering of thyroid hormone, elevations in cortisol, ghrelin, our hunger hormone, tends to go up a little bit. And then our reproductive hormones like testosterone for men, and then testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen for women can fall over time as a result of metabolic adaptation, which is basically just a natural process that occurs anytime energy restriction or calorie restriction is taking place. So don't freak out about that. You can correct it to an extent, and you can mitigate it through healthy lifestyle and intelligent dieting and training. So is it a little bit of a red flag if I see fats dropping? Potentially, but also depends how long have I been doing that, the depth, duration, and frequency of the deficit. If someone's just doing it, it's a very tail end of a diet phase, they could be okay, assuming we have plans to get back to maintenance calories. Where I'm concerned is when people are doing that months on end, or they really don't have an exit strategy for their diet. That's what's going to be most concerning to me. And we have to remember, while we do derive, there's some cholesterol and kind of precursors to hormones coming from the diet. A lot of people forget that actually our liver makes a tremendous amount of cholesterol. And so dietary fat is important for other reasons and contributes to overall energy intake. But some of the hormonal adaptations I described are happening not so much just because of the reduced fat intake. It has to do with calories as a whole and even carbohydrates dropping. So when carbohydrates drop, that impacts insulin and leptin, and as well as our ability to kind of manage that hunger and satiety system that I referenced earlier. So I'm more curious just in terms of the overall trajectory of the macronutrients and calories. And then if the fats end up low, okay, well, is this just a byproduct of being in a season of calorie restriction and dieting, or has this person had fats like rock bottom for a really long time? And fats are important for a number of things, right? Not just hormones, just across the board systemic bodily processes. We need those good dietary fats. And so the reason I would drive them up is not only just for overall calories, but, we want, get in, good monounsaturated fats, omega-3 fatty acids can be great for joint health as well. Again, managing, hunger between meals, that can be a factor too. So lots of reasons to pay attention to dietary fat. I think people kind of hyperfixate on that fat hormone connection, but there's a lot more that goes into healthy hormones than just only the total of dietary fat. Because what I worry about is people going to the other extreme, which is like, well, fat's good for my hormones, so I should just eat a lot of dietary fat, right? So I have to be careful in that setting when we're speaking to a lot of people versus a one-to-one conversation, because I don't want people to just be like,
Sure.
going crazy with oils and stuff like that, or all of a sudden it's like, I'm going to have bacon wrapped everything and, cheese on every meal. That's not what we're going for. So got to find a little bit of a middle ground. But fats do play an important role in that process, and just having 9 calories per gram as well really, can be a pretty big driver in terms of people's overall intake. So we definitely pay attention to that. And then being more of that precursor on the reproductive hormone side, a common misnomer, people think that fat's like a precursor to thyroid hormones, but it's actually not. Thyroid hormones, tyrosine and iodine base versus dietary fat on the reproductive hormone side. That's where people get more into cholesterol and like the mother hormone that then creates, they're talking about the sex hormone cascade. And so that gets confused when people start talking about hormones on Instagram and on YouTube. And so you just have to be careful of that conversation as well, of where people are getting their information from.
Yeah, no, that's super useful for you to clarify that. So thank you.
Yeah, we're fans of, we work with a company called Blokes that we encourage everybody to get blood work done at least every 6 months, or at least every year, excuse me. If you can, every 6 months. And I recently got my blood work back. So I guess on the surface, if someone goes to Blokes, which by the way, everyone listening should get their blood work done at least once a year. If you're not, Blokes has it for $75. It's so affordable, Sam, that I don't know why people wouldn't do it. But anyways, when you're looking at blood work, what factors, if you had to narrow it down to like a few, should people be looking at that maybe they don't take into consideration? Obviously I think, well, just tell me, what do you think are a few items that you think maybe aren't talked about as much, or what people should be focused on and should be tracking trends over time that you've seen?
Yeah, I'll give a mix for kind of the general health enthusiast, and then also athletes and longevity considerations as well. So usually when you go to the doctor and you go to a primary care physician or just for a general physical, just to clarify the difference between going and doing your labs yourself versus maybe going to a normal doctor's office. Usually you get a CBC and a CMP. This is a complete blood count and a very basic metabolic panel. Just has some basic indicators of organ function, electrolyte status, things of that nature. Sometimes you'll get your lipids, which is a very kind of rudimentary view of cholesterol. Really, they're lipoproteins. It's not even like very hyper-specific to, it's not as specific as we can get with cardiovascular disease. And you're really missing a lot in terms of hormones. Like you really have to kind of beg and plead to get things like testosterone and thyroid and insulin and stuff like that. So if you're looking on your own, we're going to start with those basics, but we're going to add some really specific markers to create the most value and give you the best insights and picture when it comes to your health. So on top of that CBC and CMP and the basic tests that your doctor's going to include, which will give you like a fasted glucose and some general information about your blood cells, we also want to look at a complete picture of your thyroid health, which is going to include TSH, free T3, free T4. Women may, depending on if they have a history of autoimmune disease in their families, or if any sisters or aunts or mothers, grandmothers have autoimmune history, they may want to look at Hashimoto's risk factors, especially if they train very intensely and diet very intensely. Reproductive hormones for men and women, we always want to look at testosterone, free testosterone. Progesterone for women is a very important indication of menstrual cycle health. And anyone who's premenopausal as a female should be looking for those progesterone and estradiol levels. And then if you are someone who's maybe in more of that perimenopausal setting, you want to look at estradiol, progesterone, and free testosterone as well, just through a slightly different lens because we're in a different season of life. metabolic health markers. I love fasting insulin. Great to see your insulin sensitivity and how you're responding to your dietary patterns or nutritional patterns. And then there's a marker called C-reactive protein. That's a great marker of inflammation in the body. And so it's the kind you want is a highly sensitive C-reactive protein. And I tend to look at more specific insights based on family history. So if I'm working with a client or maybe for myself, like I mentioned, my dad's history of having a 98% blockage, I'm going to zoom in on some of the cardiovascular risk parameters. So some really great markers there. There's one called LPA. So like Lisa, Paul, and then Adam, and then APOB. So these are more specific measurements of cardiovascular risk. So depending on your family history, you might want to do that. But just some mainstays for everybody, like fasting insulin's great, CRP's great, thyroid health's great, reproductive hormones, very, very important. If I had to add some other ones in there, looking at something like your vitamin D status. So your hydroxy vitamin D, very, very important. Most people are not going to get enough from their diet. And depending on geographically where you live, in terms of your sun exposure, also ethnicity can play a role in deficiency there. And for athletes, maybe adding some things like RBC magnesium to look at magnesium status, that could be a good one as well. So really depending on your lifestyle, your goals, and your family health history, working with a health professional, you can kind of tailor these down a little more specifically. But I've just tried to provide kind of a broad range of what people might want to look for if they're just looking to generally optimize their health and feel better on a day-to-day basis.
Sam, I'd love to get your hot take a little bit on testosterone, just because that, we have a predominantly male audience, and
For sure.
Out of all the things that, you just rattled off all being important, I feel like because of, kind of the rise of TRT and these things, like testosterone is just like a big, I feel like a lot of men are very interested in their testosterone levels.
Yeah, of course.
I think I'd love to dive into two things. One, and maybe you can confirm this as well. One thing that I heard that was interesting was, acknowledging the fact that even if you get blood work done, that this number is a very much like a snapshot in time. And I heard that even at the time of day that you get your blood work done could have 100, 200, NG by DL, variance, because you peak earlier in the day and it kind of goes away. So kind of like, I think that that's just important for people to know out there, because I know, I've worked with some people where, they go out, they do their blood work, they get a number and they're like, oh my God, this thing's super low. And even if they don't feel any symptoms perhaps, or they don't feel like anything's wrong, now they're like, but my testosterone's low. Like, do I have to do these things? And so on and so forth. And I feel like they start kind of like spinning out of control. So that's kind of the first thing. So maybe we can address that. And then I had one more question.
Of course. Yeah. So testosterone is very important for men and women, obviously predominantly male audience here. So testosterone and free testosterone, we're going to look at that in conjunction with SHBG, which is a binding protein that can bind to your total, your testosterone and impact the amount of free testosterone you have. And then we're also going to look at estradiol, because for men, that is cardioprotective and neuroprotective. A lot of people demonize estrogen, say it's a female hormone, but estradiol is actually good in terms of your long-term health.
Okay.
If you crash that, it can actually impact how your joints feel, your fat loss, a lot of things. So we're going to look at both. Testosterone obviously has a recent rise in discussion and popularity for a number of reasons, socially, politically, athletically, like really across the board. And it is a super important hormone, and we have seen decline in recent decades for a number of reasons. It's our environment, it's our lifestyle, and many Americans are metabolically unhealthy, which makes it very hard to have good hormonal health when you're, overweight, obese, and insulin resistant. So I would say, yes, we want to check that testosterone. Is there some variance day to day, week to week, and in seasons of your life? Yes. But generally speaking, if you go get your labs and you have a lower level and you make some corrective lifestyle adjustments and you go draw it again and it's still low, and you confirm that with an additional blood sample or blood test, then it would be wise to consider, discussing your treatment options. Now, some people jump the gun, maybe they haven't been sleeping super well, or they're in a really intense phase of training, or if you're at the tail end of a diet, it's normal to see your testosterone decline when calories have come down. Calories are probably going to be highest in a maintenance phase, or, in a season where maybe you're not pushing your body quite as much, because in response to that stress, testosterone may have some transient decreases. Now, we're looking at both total testosterone and free testosterone, but that number by itself really shouldn't be your sole indicator in terms of your decision-making criteria. I always like to talk to guys about their sleep, their hunger, their recovery, their energy, their digestion, and their stress. If I see a guy who's experiencing high stress, terrible sleep, really low recoverability, energy levels in the trash, that's when we want to start that conversation, is when the biofeedback is kind of congruent with the blood work. If the biofeedback's great and you feel really good and your numbers in a physiological reference range, you may want to pump the brakes on just adding pharmaceuticals out of the gate, because there's probably some stuff you can do from a lifestyle perspective to optimize that. Now, depending on your age, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, certainly people can consider HRT or bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and adding that testosterone in. But really, that should be done after having that blood test, talking about your lifestyle. Are we doing all of those kind of prerequisites? Because realistically, you should be doing those things even if you're on TRT. You should still be prioritizing your sleep. You should still be getting your training in. You should still be getting outside for walks. You should still be optimizing your nutrition. I'm a big believer in all of those things, whether you want to be on HRT or not. And so I think that opens the blood work, kind of opens the door for the conversation, but we need to include lifestyle as well. And if you're concerned about your level, go back and test it again. Usually we want to be doing morning blood draws for testosterone. So when you go to get your fasted labs for your whole panel, it should have your testosterone and free testosterone on there. You're going to draw that. And then if need be, we can go back and repeat that and see if we're staying in that same range. A little bit of the variability that you're seeing that you referenced, that's normal. You're not going to have the same level like at every single moment of every single day. A lot of our hormones have what's called a diurnal rhythm, which means that they basically fluctuate as part of our biological clock. Don't freak out about that. That's totally okay. What I would be more concerned about is, let's say you try to make some adjustments. Maybe you're training 4 days a week, you're trying to get good sleep, manage your stress, you're improving your food quality and you're eating enough calories and you're not overweight or obese or anything like that, and you still report back with a subclinical testosterone value, that's when you really want to maybe start to have that treatment conversation. Obviously going to be up to you and your health provider if you want to do that, but those would be the red flags in my mind. Like, that's what I look for as kind of the recipe for success when it comes to testosterone.
Mm.
And based on your experience, Sam, like what, can you give a ballpark of what those clinical numbers even look like? Because that's another thing that we've even heard on the podcast with different guests, numbers all over the place, right? Like, and I guess that some of that goes into like the optimization space, where I know some people fall if like, man, but if you feel like that at 600, you could feel like this at 1200 versus, the kind of other side of the spectrum of like, hey, if you feel great at like 500, then that's fine. Like, there's no reason to move that number. So I don't know, what do those kind of ballpark numbers look like to you? If that's even something that you can share as like a general thing, or does it just depend?
I can shed some light on it for sure. So what we're talking about is the difference between like a Western range and a health optimization range, or Western range and what some people refer to as like a functional range. Mm. It all requires the context, right? Because if you could have that 500 or 600 testosterone level in total, but let's say your free is high or your percent free is high, and not all guys are going to aromatize their testosterone and estrogen at the same rate. So this is why you want a provider who's going to look at the full picture, or, understand your unique situation. Because if you have a guy who maybe he's in quote unquote normal range for total testosterone, but if he has lower free testosterone and he disproportionately aromatizes, which is just a science word that means convert. So it means it's a natural process in your body where a little enzyme comes along and converts testosterone and estrogen. So if you're converting a fair amount of that testosterone estrogen, which can happen if you have higher body fat levels, you consume alcohol in excess, you have higher inflammation, micronutrient deficiencies, you may see a guy who's converting more of the testosterone and estrogen, may also have lower free testosterone. For that person, correcting lifestyle, nutrition, and training can move them in the right direction, and also, moderating things like alcohol intake, et cetera, probably going to improve those testosterone levels, and would also lead to a more robust response should that individual decide to go on testosterone replacement. The problem that we're seeing when it comes to labs in that conversation and the question you asked is that reference range has kind of changed over time. So labs based on the metabolic health of the population, the testosterone level has kind of moved with the state of the population and our lack of health. So you do want to hold yourself to a slightly higher standard, but this is why it's so important to really think about how you feel. And if you are a younger guy, what I would do is before you need it, before you feel bad, go get your labs done, because you want to know, okay, when I was at my optimal health or when I did feel my best, and this is where I believe more in an individualized approach. I could cite numbers and I could cite ranges, but what matters for you is if you're the listener and you feel good right now, go get your labs because you want to benchmark. If you don't feel good, what you need to do is you go get your labs and let's talk about your biofeedback and let's talk about your quality of life. And then you're going to make adjustments there, because a good, functional medicine doctor or a good professional is going to really take how you're feeling into account and what your goals are and have that conversation with you relative to the lab value. But to answer your question more on the range, what we're seeing is what's been acceptable or normalized is a progressively lower testosterone level, basically since the 1980s. And we see, guys now in their 20s and 30s that have levels that are comparable to guys when they're in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, just a number of decades ago. And even, actual indicators from an anatomical perspective, like male anatomical structure, and there's like the anogenital gap and things like that have been traced outside of lab values that are showing, the impact of change of total testosterone levels and our society, and even fertility markers, right? We're seeing changes in sperm morphology and motility. So this is definitely a bit of a men's health crisis where everyone should be checking that testosterone level. But I'd be hesitant to recommend like one sole number for everybody, because not everybody has the same androgen receptor sensitivity. And
I think what you brought up well, and I have my blood work up right now. I'm just looking at it. I look at it every now and then, especially when we're doing podcasts with people. So I have it up. I think what's interesting about what you said, and is like, dude, if you feel good, go to get your blood work done, and then you could see trends over time. That was like that's a really helpful piece of information, because everybody's at a different and I think you not giving numbers, I think it's fine, because we've heard so many different things. But I will say with blokes in particular, especially with Josh, Gabe, he said the exact same thing you were saying. Like, dude, we want to make sure that we're asking people how they feel. Because, like, for example, my testosterone when I got my test in October was 553. My free was 86.6 PG per ml. And those two, right? But I feel damn good. I got tons of energy. I mean, I'm not on any, I'm not on TRT or anything like that, but like, I feel good. So I don't want to adjust, even though my testosterone on paper is a little bit low. And so, that's for me, why I think it's so important to get it done, because then you can base it on how you feel and then make adjustments and go from there. So I appreciate that feedback. I thought that was helpful.
And there's an increasement in treatment availability options that have recently expanded. So like before, the only options for guys were like injectable testosterone, which is still, a viable prescription option. I have nothing against that. But I think there's an increase in accessibility to lab work and different treatment options for men, which is important because guys need to be able to advocate for their health. And I'm a huge proponent of that. But I'm going to agree with Jason here. Like, if you feel good and you have a lab value, don't let the lab value be like the monster in the closet or the monster under the bed that's like scaring you into feeling like crap. If you feel good, like, make note of that. Go get the test done, use it as a benchmark. And that's what you should strive to maintain. And then if over time you need to incorporate some treatment, like, no shame in that, right? Like, the goal is to preserve where you feel your best. And that's kind of my philosophy. If you need to go beyond that for performance reasons, or you personally feel your best slightly higher, like many of the companies that do things like lab work and testosterone therapy, they might shoot to have a guy above 700 or more in that 700 to 900, or maybe even closer to 1,000 or maybe above that. But if someone feels good producing their testosterone naturally, it's also a conversation around male fertility and, are you trying to conceive? Are you still family planning? What age are you at? Because for a younger guy, if he's still considering having kids, it may be worthwhile holding off on that treatment for a little bit, unless you're going to be with a provider who understands how to maintain fertility using a combination of testosterone and peptides to keep that in place. The problem is a lot of people jump on just testosterone and they're in their 20s and they don't really understand the reproductive physiology and consequences of those things. So I'm just big on like make an informed decision that's best for you. I don't like to, your health is not the same as my health, and your family history is not the same as my family history. Your goals aren't the same as my goals. So my job is to educate, inform, and help you make a good choice for you. And if we can dial that in a little further, that's great. But really it's about having the tools to do that. So that's kind of where that comes from.
What about the peptides though? I mean, you brought up peptides. So what do you think about oral BPC 157 for gut health?
It's been mixed. I know it's super popular right now. I know there's like the clinical data side and research relative to in-person, person-to-person results. I've seen kind of varying results. Some people see improvements with it and really like it. Other people haven't seen as much with the oral version compared to injectable BPC, but that compound in and of itself does exist naturally in our gastric juices. It's called body protecting compound. The overall promise of it and literature behind it is pretty good. And people do see some supportive effects in terms of their overall health and well-being. The capsules themselves, I think, can vary a lot depending on things like compounding pharmacy or where you're obtaining the product from, what it's compounded with. The consumption patterns, like is someone taking this on an empty stomach? Are they following the instructions of the pharmacist and physician? So I've seen pretty wide variances in outcomes. So I don't know if it's one of those things where it's like, hey, everybody's got to take this. But it may be, if you're experiencing some issues, it may be worth a shot. Like I'm not against it. I'm very much, I'm pretty agnostic with those things. And I always, if anything, like I try a lot of things on myself before I make like broad spectrum recommendations. But I think it's one of those situations where, okay, if you have gut health issues and you're taking oral BPC, well, have we addressed the root cause of like why you actually have the problem in the first place? Peptides that I was referring to on the fertility side would be like FSH, for example, can be taken to support the production of basically maintaining the health of your sperm cells, sperm morphology and motility. You can take FSH and HCG. FSH doesn't have as many consequences in terms of aromatization, whereas HCG can be a substrate for aromatase, which means when you add HCG in, because it's signaling the Leydig cells, signaling the testicles, you can get a little bit of that testosterone converting into estradiol, which some people do fine with it and they don't have any negative symptoms. Other people don't love HCG. So the peptides I was referring to is more of what people take in conjunction with TRT. But again, that's going to be scripted from a provider. And it's more so if you're a younger guy and you're trying to maintain fertility on a longer term treatment. In an ideal situation though, if you're a younger dude and you do need to talk to your doctor about prescription therapy, it might make sense just to freeze your sperm and, even do a test. Like there's companies like Give Legacy where you can actually test your sperm health, do that first. And then if you want to go on the treatment and you go on the therapy, you don't have to worry about the consequences of that as much, or you do these adjunctive therapies with it. And that way you don't have to necessarily come off and go back on the treatment. Like that can be really bad from a men's hormonal balance perspective. So those were the peptides I was referring to, but there's certainly peptides are a whole world in and of themselves, super popular for recovery and performance enhancement. And there's literally hundreds of them. So no short, that could be like peptides are like a whole podcast in and of itself.
Crazy topic. Sam, I wanted to kind of pose a hypothetical for you just to give some tactical advice to who, and Jason, like stop me at any point if you think that something's like way off, but like, I want to give you like what I think is like our general kind of listener and a lot of the questions that we get common. Cause I think that, as I listen to all the information that you've given, and it's been a lot and super useful, I think sometimes it can be overwhelming and like, what do I start? What do I prioritize? Like, what's the first thing that I should do? So I think that generally speaking, our listener and the guy on our app is generally a dad. One thing that we've heard a lot is like the sleep thing. They know it's important, but it's tough because kids are in the mix now. I know that I fall in that boat now. So there's kind of a little bit of that's outside their control. I think generally speaking, it's like the busy individual that like has kind of grown accustomed to either skipping or not prioritizing breakfast and is just kind of like backloading their food later in the day. I think alcohol isn't like a problem, but it's something that, is just generally like I don't know, I would say probably average like maybe 4 or 5 drinks a week, like Friday and on the weekend socially. Nothing that anyone would say like, hey, drinking every day, but it's definitely something that they're doing. And I think that, people are loosely tracking macros kind of here and there. They have like this, general understanding of like how much they should eat. But I do think that on the quality side, a lot of people are just kind of like focusing on that and not too much on the quality side. So maybe given that hypothetical, and Jason, I'm curious if you would kind of like add anything or change anything.
No, I think
what would you recommend for that guy to start?
So a couple things, and I want to get one cop out of the way. So kids have a circadian rhythm too, and you can entrain that circadian rhythm. Get your kids outside, get them playing, go for walks with your kids. Don't have them playing video games or watching a ton of TV right before bed. Like read a book, get off like the same things that we would do to optimize adult health, we need to be doing with kids as well. I have nephews, so like them having a routine is essential. I think parents sometimes are like, well, the kids are impacting my sleep. Well, it's like, have we enrolled the whole family in having this routine together, whether it's breakfast, whether it's what we do after dinner, whether it's, are we playing outside after school? I think those things actually go a really long way. And circadian biology applies to humans as a whole, right? It's not just like, oh, you turn 40 years old and now your circadian rhythm matters, right? So pay attention to that. I think on the movement side, like for your guys, like prioritizing resistance training 3 to 4 times a week, getting in some conditioning of some kind, daily steps, being active with your family and your kids, keeping that movement in. As far as, so I think the earlier comment helps on the sleep side. I think a lot of people forget that. There are some supportive supplements and nutrients you can use to optimize sleep. Some of my favorites are magnesium, theanine, and glycine. It's a great combination before bed. For guys, being mindful of like your work screen time and trying to maintain like similar sleep and wake times can be great. Alcohol consumption, I'm more of the mindset of if you're really trying to get serious about your health and fitness, just even if it's only for a season, really moderating that intake down and being aggressive with it. Because what a lot of guys realize is like they don't really miss it once they've taken it out. It's just kind of like this thing that's been in for a really long time. But once they remove it, they actually feel better. Their training performance improves and they don't rely on it as much. And sometimes they're just doing it out of habit or because in the social situation, other people are drinking. So they're drinking. It's not even like a conscious choice. So we just want to raise awareness around alcohol consumption because in many cases, guys don't miss it as much as they think they will. If you're dead set on, that's something you're going to do on a Saturday or Sunday, I think it's just keeping it confined and contained because it will impact your sleep. It will impact your training. Anyone who's training at a very high level knows that and would openly share that. It's not just in a research study. We see it in real world humans all the time. Other things for guys, like I think protein at every meal to help moderate appetite and manage that. Overall in terms of, everyone's going to have different body size and activity levels. So those calorie and macro targets may change, but if you're eating mostly single ingredient whole foods and a little bit of flexibility here and there with your kids, I think flexible restraint can be a good thing, meaning you can rotate your food choices here and there, but we're also not getting into a free-for-all like every day or every weekend or finishing everything that's on your kid's plate. So for that age group, a lot of it starts with the lifestyle, sleep, getting outside, getting that movement in, resistance training. Obviously, as you increase your responsibilities as an adult, stress management is a big one that can be hard, but it's not always about necessarily cutting things out or, trying to meditate like a monk all the time. I think a lot of it has to do with like aligning some of your stress with your purpose and your work that you're doing, and then being mindful of like that accumulation of stress. So trying to be conscious of your bandwidth, but also diverting. Like if you are going to have stress in your life, it should be for things that you really care about. And it's like your life's purpose and what you're working towards. In other cultures, like even in Asian cultures, it's kind of ikigai is the idea of having a purpose. I think stress tied to purpose is very different than just like stress and drama from low level things and social media and like kind of toxic things that infiltrate the modern world. So really trying to be a little bit more grounded with that. And if it's about your family or you own your business, I think that's very, very different than some of the other things we see in modern life. So those would be some of my big ones. There's other stuff I could add, but I think those are some big rocks that go a really long way.
No, I think that's perfect, man. And I just want to clarify that we didn't coordinate this beforehand, but you basically rattled off our nutrition protocol, and I'm loving it, man. It was music to our ears.
Protein
That's
per
awesome.
meal. It's like, oh, really?
It's the basics,
Yeah.
man. It's just the universal basics. I love
I
it.
have like a little acronym to help people remember if we have time, but it's basically my 5 M's for managing metabolism. So I do talk about it a little bit in my book. But when you're thinking about your meal and your day-to-day nutrition, you've got to make choices that help to manage appetite, because if you're hungry all the time, you're not going to stick to your nutrition. Protein and your meal patterns and having kind of those balanced meals just helps to regulate hunger, appetite, and blood sugar. It needs to be foods we absorb well. If something's not gut friendly, if you don't digest it well, if you're constantly running to the toilet, it's not optimal for nutrition. That's not optimal for your health. You need to mitigate metabolic adaptation. So a lot of guys try to be really lean. They're trying to increase their training. But if you're under fueling and you're under eating and we're experiencing that metabolic adaptation, that's when we see those lower hormone levels. If you are someone that's been overweight or you have weight to lose, this one is a little bit less important for you right now. But as you get further into your diet and you get leaner and leaner, that's when that one's going to apply. The other M is micronutrients. So making sure that the foods we have good vitamin and mineral content. This is where it's like fruit's not going to make you fat. Like eat some fruit, get that in there with your protein, and that's a snack option for you guys if you need it. So those are some big ones. Metabolic adaptation, maximizing absorption, managing appetite. I kind of go through all of those and different strategies for that in a lot of my content, but those are really good starting places for Gen Pop clients and just the average health enthusiast.
Yeah. One of the things I think that you shared that I think it's a good thing to highlight to kind of at least close this out, that I picked up right now, this like last little segment you said, is in regards to the kids having a circadian rhythm as well. Again, just like everything with parenting, it's easier said than done, and there's always nuance and there's always like whatever. But if you think about it in similar fashion, right? Are you going to be able to get your kids to go to sleep? My kids are older, right? I have a 14 and 11-year-old. Is it easier for them to go to sleep if they're, getting screen time right before? Or, are we looking at the same principles that we're talking about for adults? They apply to kids, and it's not going to make it perfect, right? Like if Gabe could incorporate this as much as he wants, if his 1-year-old wakes up in the middle of the night, I mean, it is what it is, but it still will help, right?
Scale, we got to scale the principles for the person. So think of it as with a kid, like if we were in a CrossFit gym and someone's trying to get their first pull up, maybe we're doing some rows, maybe we're doing some suspension trainer stuff, maybe some banded stuff, maybe some eccentrics, maybe some static holds. Like you're doing different things to scale the movement. Or if someone can't do a push-up, they're doing a modified push-up. If your kids are trying to get into those healthy schedules and patterns, they don't need to be religiously biohacking. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's like, hey, if you go outside in the morning, like maybe take your kids on the walk with you, or you can put your kid in a stroller and go outside, and I think parents, like what I'm saying is don't play the victim. Try to have some influence in this conversation and realize that your little humans also have circadian biology, just like big grown adult humans. It may be harder to kind of cement some of those habits, but you're also a leader, right? Like in your family. So it's part of that conversation of everyone's going to have to try it on for size and figure out the version that works best for them, just like training and nutrition. But I think sometimes parents kind of have a little bit of a cop out, and it's like, because they're watching Netflix and their kids are playing video games, and then they're complaining that their kids won't go to sleep on time. So it's just auditing that environment. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, it doesn't mean your kids need to be like doing cold plunges and stuff right out of the gate. Like that's not what I'm saying at all. But I think people will let their kids like be glued to a screen and not go outside. And then they wonder why they're having a hard time, with sleep and basic behaviors. So that's
100%. Well, Sam, I really appreciate you. For people, I mean, you're like an encyclopedia of information. For people who want to dive into the encyclopedia more, what's the best option for them? Should they go get your book? What is it?
Yeah, so I'm Sam Miller Science on just about every major platform. So just my full name and then the word science. My book is called Metabolism Made Simple. It's making sense of nutrition to transform metabolic health. I usually have that on social media or my website. I'm most active on my podcast and Instagram. And aside from that, if someone is a health professional and they want to learn more about the concepts that I teach and speak on, like in podcasts like this one, you can head over to Metabolism School on Instagram or metabolismschool.com.
Perfect. Well, Sam, we appreciate you. For everybody listening, appreciate you guys. I'm sure you guys got a bunch out of this particular episode. Simple ask, share it with a few friends, leave the podcast a rating and review, and as per usual, keep training hard. Let's go.